leg locks used to be considered cheap, a dirty submission for the uncultured. Even in only the last decade, I've seen such a huge shift in both the popularity and reputation of leg locks, and for good reason. Why ignore 50% of the body and only get to experience 50% of the fun? Leg lock prevention and defense are a need to know for all grapplers of the modern era. Which is why I put together this video, how to not get leg locked. But before we start, we need to look at how leg locks work, and we'll specifically be looking at leg locks which target the knee, such as knee bars and heel hooks. Although many of the tips and concepts remain true for the majority of leg submissions. To hit a leg lock such as a knee bar or heel hook, you need one of your opponent's legs between your two legs, with their knee and foot in front of your hips. For example, here, my opponent's knee is behind my hips. I reposition my legs, and now his knee is in front of my hips. In this example, it's the same thing. My opponent's knee is behind my hips, and I front roll to position his knee in front of my hips. The traditional backstep is the same. You backstep so their knee is positioned in front of your hips. All entries are like this, and which submission you go for is dependent on the angle of your hips in relation to your opponent's knee. For example, with a knee bar, your hips and their knee are facing each other. With the heel hook, you position your hips on the side of their knee. An outside heel hook, your hips are on the inside of their knee. And an inside heel hook, your hips are on the outside of their knee. That might sound confusing, but they're named after which part of the knee each primarily attack, not where your hips are facing. You control their leg on each end. One end of their leg is controlled with your arms, and the other end is controlled with your legs. To get breaking power, it's all in the hips. Your hips act as a fulcrum. You're not breaking bones, you're tearing ligaments. A leg obviously isn't one big long bone. It's the femur connected to the tibia. They're connected by ligaments. A knee bar is pretty straightforward. You bend the leg in the opposite direction in which it's designed. But there's a little more to it when it comes to heel hooks. People mistakenly think that breaking power is all about rotating the heel with your arms, but what your arms are actually doing is positioning the lower leg into a very weak position by first rotating the heel and then bridging into their knee with your hips to rip apart the ligaments. Now that we've covered how leg locks that attack the knee work, now let's look at how to not get leg locked. We'll be looking at leg lock prevention rather than escapes. Escapes are for another video, and it'll be presented in a tip format, as I'm going to be teaching you conceptual ideas to avoid leg locks. Let's get started, but first, guys, stop for a second and check out your current belt. Not your jiu-jitsu belt, your belt's belt. Does it look acceptable? Is it cracking? Is it stylish? And do you feel comfortable wearing it? Is it too big, too small, or falling apart? With Anson belts, you never have to worry about cracking of your belt or an inaccurate fit. Its design, durability, and how fashionable it is are all top-notch. I really love wearing them and wear them all the time now. Which is funny because I never used to wear belts other than my jiu-jitsu belt. Anson belts are made of the highest quality materials and designed with micro adjustments, and they have no holes. With their micro adjustability, Anson belts allows you to have a more accurate fit and easy adjustments on the go. Anson belts are all a one-size-fits-all, and they come with a lifetime guarantee. Plus, they have so many variations of styles, colors, and materials when it comes to their straps or buckles. They're a great gift idea for any age, male or female. Go check out Anson belts now. Click my link in the description below for a special offer. I suggest taking advantage of the great offer for 20% off the box set, which allows you to select either 3 straps and 2 buckles or 2 straps and 3 buckles. Tip number 1. Don't step behind your opponent with one leg between their legs. This is a big mistake. In fact, I've won many competitive matches by my opponent making this mistake. It's incredibly important to be aware of your leg positioning when attacking from turtle, as well as standing with a body lock. These are the 2 positions in which you might find yourself stepping behind your opponent. Watch how here, I anticipate that my opponent is going to attack my legs, so I position my legs on the side of him, rather than in the middle between his legs. Sometimes imperfect leg positioning will happen and your opponent will front roll to try to position your knee in front of their hips. In which case you need to hide your foot behind your opponent as soon as possible, and you can do so by hooking with your InStep. Which brings us to the next tip. Tip number 2, hook with your InStep. Hooking with my InStep is something that has saved me so many times from being submitted on YouTube. A no submission streak that I'd like to keep going. Hooking with the leg that they're attacking is ideal, but if you can't make that happen, then hooking with the InStep of your other leg can help keep your leg safe. Hooking with your InStep isn't just useful for protecting yourself from turtle and the body lock entries, but leg entanglement entries as a whole, with a great example being protecting yourself from backsteps. So let's look at backsteps. Tip number 3, be ready for the backstep. There are only so many ways that your opponent can enter a leg entanglement from top position. The most common and readily available way is to do so with a backstep, especially from quarter guard, which means that the guard passer's ankle is between your legs, but not their knee like half guard. Knowing that this is such a common setup, you need to be ready for it, and there are a lot of different ways to address it, such as blocking their leg from backstepping using your outside leg, like you see me do here, and here against Chewy. Hooking with your InStep is another common way. For example here, I hook onto their inside leg with the InStep of my inside leg. But you can also hook onto their outside leg and take their back, for a pretty cool back take. What I recommend is drilling with a partner, them trying to backstep and you trying different methods to stop them, to build muscle memory. Because when I'm defending in quarter guard, I'm not thinking what technique I'm going to use, I'll just hook with my InStep or block them if they backstep. Tip number 4, don't let your opponent get underneath your hips. This is obviously easier said than done against a good leg locker, but knowing what your opponent needs from their guard to enter leg entanglements is at least half the battle. If your opponent is able to position their hips underneath your hips, they can enter right into a leg entanglement. Like here I enter the saddle from my guard. It also allows your opponent to enter into guards, which they can then enter into leg entanglements. For example, X guard. With your opponent underneath your hips, they can more easily redistribute your weight and make your legs light, so they can manipulate your leg positioning in relation to their legs. The way you stop this is being aware of how you position your weight, being aware of where you place your feet on the mat, controlling the feet of the guard player, which is an important concept from top position to defend the guard player's attacks just in general. When you find yourself in positions where you messed up and your opponent is looking to get underneath your hips, you need to be ready to bail when necessary. Prioritize controlling your opponent's hips regardless of the type of passing that you're using, as the less likely they'll be able to leg lock you. Now let's look at what to do next if they do enter a leg entanglement. Tip number 5, clear the knee line. This one's more so an escape, but I wanted to include it anyways. Clearing the knee line is probably the most important concept that there is for escaping leg locks, and it's pretty simple to understand. Your opponent needs to drive their hips into your knee. If you position their hips below your knee, then they can't do that. You need to free your upper leg from their control that they have with their legs. To do so, you can use your hands or your feet. You can also build a base by getting your hands and feet to the mat and utilizing gravity to help assist you. You just have to be aware of the calf slicer counter when you do clear the knee line. Spinning is also helpful, as you can clear the knee line more and more as you spin, but there is risk they might get you as you roll. Conclusion: when you're first learning leg locks and leg lock defense, be very careful. Tap early and tap often. The more experienced you get, the more you'll know your limits, and whether or not you're actually in trouble and need to tap, or if you don't. If you guys want to see a detailed video on specific escapes, let me know. But for now, these tips should help you to not get leg locked.